Welcome to a very special episode of Gaming Insight. I'm Steve Saylor. I have coffee in my Doom Dark Ages mug today. It is very early in the morning. So apologies for the very business-like episode this is going to be, but this literally just happened, and I brought on the best person to be able to talk about this at literally 9 o'clock in the morning. It's Mike Futter, good friend, consultant, and co-founder of F Squared LLC. How you doing, Mike?
I'm doing well. Thanks so much for having me, and thank God for the coffee, right? It is an early morning on a Monday.
It's a big part of my show, and I'm just like, yeah, I never needed it more than I did right now. The reason why I brought you on, Mike, is definitely to talk about this bombshell of a news that sort of was rumored on Friday, but then kind of officially happened as of this morning. I'm reading this off of VGC by Chris Scullion. EA confirms that it will be acquired for $55 billion, that's billion with a B, by investors, including Saudi Arabia's Public Investment Fund. Apparently, they are acquiring for 100% of the company. EA stockholders will receive $210 per share in cash, which is 25% premium on the company's last unaffected share price of $168.32. EA says the transaction, which has been approved by its board of directors and expected to close in Q1 of its fiscal year 2027, which means end of June of 2026. EA expects the acceleration of growth and innovation to build the future of entertainment. The deal will see EA continue to be led by its current CEO, Andrew Wilson, so he's still going to be in charge. In a statement, Wilson said, "Our creative and passionate teams at EA have delivered extraordinary experiences for hundreds of millions of fans, built some of the world's most iconic IP, and created significant value for our business. This moment is powerful recognition of their remarkable work." For those who may not know, the PIF, or Public Investment Fund, is the sovereign wealth fund of Saudi Arabia, and is reportedly central to Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman's goal of making the Saudi economy less resilient on proceeds from oil. This is, again, written from VGC. The fund already owns billions of stock in other video game companies, this is important, such as Take-Two, and owns other companies such as SNK. And then if you're wondering what the other companies were, basically Affinity Partners.
It's a laundry list.
Yeah, Affinity Partners, that's another big one. Basically, it's owned by Donald Trump's son-in-law, Jared Kushner.
Yep, which also, just to be clear, funded by Saudi Arabia.
Yeah, so a lot of Saudi money being invested into this. And Mike, I want to ask the question about this because we've seen sort of this big kind of acquisition in the video game industry before. I mean, literally not even, the ink has barely been dry of the Microsoft Activision deal. What's the difference between that and this deal with EA and all these investors?
Sure. This deal is actually a little bit closer to what's happened with Atari than it is with any of the hundreds of acquisitions that, let's say, Embracer Group made. So this is not a public-facing deal. This is not one public company purchasing another public company. This is a group of private investors that say, hey, we're going to pay out a premium on the outstanding shares, and we're going to take this company private. Now, that has a lot of ramifications. And the biggest one is we will no longer have insight into EA. EA will no longer be required to report on a quarterly basis to the public in the same way that it has for years and years and years. So you want to be able to make a comparison. You want to know how your favorite franchise is doing, want to know how Battlefield did, want to know how FIFA or EAFC is doing. You know, I'm sure they're going to talk about their successes, but they do not have to expose their shortfalls to the public because they don't have that responsibility to shareholders anymore. Their responsibility is to these private owners.
Is that sort of similar to how, because we've famously, Nintendo doesn't like to share a lot of their stuff. Is that a similar thing, or is like Nintendo?
No, Nintendo is still a public company. In fact, quarterly we still get lots of information on Nintendo on a quarterly basis. We know how many units are sold. Nintendo does a great job not only of breaking down how many console units are sold, but when there's multiple SKUs. Back when you had the Switch, you had the Switch OLED, you had the Switch Lite, they actually broke that down. So you knew exactly how each SKU was performing. They report out their software, and that's always shifting on a quarterly basis. Now, we get a lot of insight into companies like Nintendo. We will not get that same insight that we've had into EA. And
Unless
there's a
it
number of
basically is
other things that are going to go away with this too.
Yeah, unless it's like sort of like a PR sort of beat that they'll be like 3 million copies sold in the first 3 minutes or whatever.
Exactly. And those are the things that you're going to hear. They're going to be able to very vocally tout their successes and not have to share when they have those shortfalls. So you're never going to know if EA has a down quarter unless you're looking at the negative space. Hey, they didn't say anything about this, so I wonder what's going on. But it's always going to be fuzzy. It's always going to be in that privately owned fog of war.
Right. So with that in mind, what does this mean internally for EA? Because like we had talked about just before we started recording, is that they have currently at least $20 billion in debt.
Yes.
That basically they're on the hook for. What is that like with now that the investors are they paying off that debt, or is it basically EA's responsibility? Like, no, we got to pay you now.
No, so the way this works, so this is what's called a leveraged buyout. Now, it's not fully leveraged. This is an all-cash deal, which is kind of what you would expect in when you're taking a company private. You've got to pay that cash out to the shareholders. But $20 billion of the $55 billion estimated, deal value is going to be leveraged. So I think it's JP Morgan Chase is providing the debt financing. Now, EA is going to carry that debt on their books until it is fully serviced. And when we talk about servicing debt, we're talking about the payments that need to be made against that debt on a regular basis. So if you aren't familiar with the concept of a leverage buyout, or you're wondering, is this good? Is this bad? Well, the thing that I typically point to is Toys R Us. Now, you're in Canada. Very lucky. I wish I was up there with you. Believe me, it's not a great time down here.
There's still time. There's still time, Mike.
Believe me, we're thinking about it. But Toys R Us, as most of your fans probably know, it no longer exists in the United States, and that's because it was taken over, gone private in a leveraged buyout. They were saddled with so much debt that the company was simply unable to service that debt. So what happens is you have all of this land where all of these Toys R Us locations are. The company that takes them private, in this case I think it was Vornado, gets to sell all of those assets, right? And they don't have to service that debt, because when Toys R Us goes bankrupt, all of that debt kind of gets parsed out in the way it does with a bankruptcy. You have your order of operations in terms of which investors get paid first, and then everybody else gets left out in the cold. But the private equity company gets to turn around and wash their hands of it and say, we just made money and we get to sell all this land.
My goodness. Like now, with that being said, is that it? Like what's going to happen to EA? Are they going to have to sell studios and across their entire portfolio?
I think it's going to be remain to be seen. Now, of course, this is pending shareholder approval.
Of course. Yeah.
So we won't know until shareholders approve. The only way I see this not being approved is if some shareholder group mounts some huge defense and says, yes, we know that there's a lot of money on the table, but we're not happy with who's purchasing the company and it doesn't align with values. It's not going to happen. This deal is going to go through. I would be shocked if this deal did not go through, especially with Kushner involved. Like, yes, there's going to be regulatory oversight. But is there really? No, not in the kleptocracy that is the United States of America right now. So what I am worried about labor, and I'm worried about it for about labor for a couple of reasons. Number one is, yes, this debt needs to be serviced. In other words, that is going to affect EA's balance sheet and their P&L on a quarterly basis. We'll never see that, of course, because they are going to be under no obligation to report those details. But there is a large possibility that we will see layoffs, that we will see studio closures, that we will see contraction, because it's the IP in terms of these private equity investors. That's what has the value. So that if EA were to go away, they could still sell off that IP. And we've seen that a bunch of times. In fact, we're seeing it in other places now. Ubisoft just sold off 5 older IPs to Atari. Yeah. Which we call that, so in the nonprofit world, my previous career is in the nonprofit world, when museums sell off their collections, it's called deaccessioning. And that's the term that I use whenever I see a company that is otherwise still viable selling off their IP. So when Ubisoft deaccessions 5 legacy IP to another company, even though they're legacy, they're not big. We're not talking Far Cry or Assassin's Creed. We're talking Child of Light, for instance, was one of them. I get a little concerned. So if we start, that will be a kind of a canary in the coal mine. If we see EA potentially starting to sell off some of its lesser known IP, like for instance, if Wing Commander gets sold off to Atari, for instance, and that one, That one could be. I mean, because remember, Atari owns Night Dive. If they sell off Wing Commander and suddenly the Wing Commander games get the Night Dive treatment, all of that would make sense, but it's not a good look. It's kind of the warning shot that something bigger is going on.
So with, again, yeah, even kind of jumping into it further, like within EA, I mean, obviously we would imagine that the sport franchises are probably going to be safe, but when it comes to other studios, like either well, maybe Respawn might be the only other one that kind of might be relatively safe, I guess. But who knows? Like, what is that? What does that mean? Like for EA Originals, is Joseph Ferris going to be okay?
Well, I mean, that's a good question. I think if anybody's going to be okay in the EA Originals deal, Joseph's going to be fine because his games continue to do well. And if you look at the way EA Originals has shifted over the years, they've started with like 3 or 4 titles, and then they've gone to like 1 title every year, and every other year it's a Haze-like game. So and on the off year, I think they did Zao.
By Surgeon Studios, yeah,
kind of the off Joseph year. So we'll see what happens with that. I am more worried about studios like BioWare that have not lived up to their historical potential. Now, again, studios are like this are a ship of Theseus. The BioWare today is not the BioWare it was when Dragon Age Origins came out, for instance. So I worry about studios like that. But also, when you look at how much Saudi money is involved, when you look at the fact that Jared Kushner's company, and remember, he's the son-in-law of the current president of the United States. Yay. Everybody knows what my feeling about that whole thing. I am a little worried about the content. And I use that term not like the IP or anything. I'm talking about literally what is in these games. BioWare games have typically had very strong, LGBTQ, themes, not exclusively, but The Sims as well. Like, what's going to happen to The Sims? So, I mean, that's something to keep your eye on as well. EA used to be at the forefront of DEI. They always reported exactly what they were doing. They were at the forefront of LGBTQ issues and inclusion in terms of sexual diversity and gender diversity and all of those things. I don't know what is going to happen there. That is another thing that I am very concerned about. And what does that mean for labor? If your company no longer makes this a priority, what message does it send to talent?
Yeah, I would even say, like, even jumping onto that from the accessibility side, I do know that EA has been able to make a concerted effort in accessibility over the past several games. Like now, like they were kind of the very early adopters of accessibility back when it was kind of like still being sort of figured out within studios. But now there's actually like a full accessibility team that is, we're starting to see more of that being implemented into this, even the biggest franchise with the sports franchise. We see like literally just EAFC 25, they're including high contrast mode into all modes of the game, including multiplayer, which is a first in the industry. And so we're like, but that also can be up in the air because accessibility is considered as part of DEI. And I know that we talk about it like DEI, and it's like it could be considered like the very kind of controversial topics for some reason, but it is something that like with the investors involved, not really going into full politics of the whole thing, but yes, I agree with you. I think DEI it's going to be that canary in the coal mine, sort of like, are they going to go like, or are they going to, are they just going to kind of go with, hey, we're EA's run as it's run and no other, like, actually, yeah, the question is like, well, how much of these investment firms are going to have any say in the day-to-day, or are they going to be basically bending Andrew Wilson's ear like every chance they get?
Well, I mean, it remains to be seen what the organizational structure is going to look like once the deal closes. But I actually expect that Andrew Wilson will be out shortly after this deal closes. This is this is the last thing you do. Like, this is a big thing that happens. And I'll look at Doug Bowser leaving Nintendo of America. Switch 2 comes out, it's established, he gets through the launch, he's retiring at the end of the year. I fully expect that. So if this deal closes, as you said, fiscal Q1, fiscal year 27, so that's by the end of June of next year, let's say it closes middle, sometime during that quarter as planned, I would expect that Andrew Wilson might retire at the end of 2026.
Okay.
And
Is there any potential like who would be taken? Like, is this going to be like an internal, okay, you move up sort of deal, or is it sort of
sure.
like they might bring in someone else?
So if this were simply Andrew Wilson leaving and the company remaining public, what I would expect is that Laura Milley would be a prime candidate to take over. She's grown within the company. Vince Zampella, I would be surprised if he were interested in being CEO of the company, but he would be another candidate. So Laura and Vince internally would be the two people that I'd look and say, okay, you are the two that I think understand the company well. You understand the studio structure. You understand the mission. You're going to continue to drive that shareholder value, as you hear us joke about all the time. Now, in this situation where you have a private company, who knows? Now, it could be that the private equity firms that will own EA will look at this and say, yes, we want that continuity. So it could be promoting Laura, promoting Vince, or it could be bringing somebody from the outside that they can control more directly. It really depends on how this all shakes out in terms of the structure and the relationship with the investors. So I really don't know right now, and I don't think I'd be comfortable making a guess. But those are the two paths. Either
Gotcha.
it's going to be someone internal because everybody's playing ball and the relationships are strong and they want that continuity, or it's going to be someone outside because people like Laura and Vince, there's friction between them and the owners.
Okay, so it's June 2026. They like the deal goes through, or like actually, the question I wasn't even going to even ask, like because we saw all of the drawing out of the Microsoft Activision deal, and like obviously with the court hearings within the FCC and all that. Are we going to see a similar situation here, or
No.
is it because of the politics of the we got the son-in-law? Like, is this just going to go straight through?
I mean, I think that's going to help grease the wheels for sure. But I think the difference here is that when Microsoft acquired Activision, you had competitors, namely Sony, who was looking at this and saying, this is bad for the industry. This is bad for consumers. So you had somebody who was carrying that torch of bad for consumers. I don't think you're going to see that same thing where another company stands up and says, hey, we think this is bad for the industry. We actually think this is anti-competitive. And that was the big thing with Microsoft and Activision, was there was this anti-competitive angle. That's not the case here. So you're not going to see that same protest. You'll see consumers mount some kinds of protests. I have no doubt about that, but I don't know that they're going to be effective. I don't know how they would be effective, quite frankly.
Gotcha. And speaking of consumers, I guess, like kind of the big question I know that a lot of us are kind of thinking about, like what does this mean for the players, for the gamers? Like we famously, like we have like Madden and EAFC kind of like being those outliers within the video game industry, that the people who don't normally play video games, that's the games that they play. It's either FC, Madden, or Call of Duty, and those are the kind of the main three sort of outside games. Maybe even Fortnite, I guess, to a certain degree, but like those are the main sort of threes. Like, what does this mean for the players moving forward? Like, are we talking like maybe not at all, because like, or like, is as we said, like the studios close or getting sold, we may not see that sort of like EA have the big impact as the big one of the big third parties. Like, what does that mean for us players?
So I think, again, like anything else, because there is a lot of unknowns right now, this could range from as simple as, hey, we're going to be hands off. We just want EA to keep making money, make the decisions you're going to keep making. We actually trust you. To, no, you need to service this debt. And how are you going to service this debt with the cash available? You need to free up some cash. So in order to free up some cash, that's where you get layoffs, studio closures, and things like that. Now, for the players, obviously, this is going to impact anytime you see a license go away for one reason or the other, or you see studios get closed or games get canceled. That has an impact on players and player trust. So I think that is the thing that is going to directly impact players the most, is if BioWare gets shut down, and we've seen storied studios get shut down by big companies over and over and over again. I mean, it goes all the way back to Lionhead. with Xbox shutting them down. So this would not be with outside the realm of expectation. That's how it starts to impact players. Now, the one group that we haven't really talked about is labor. I mean, obviously, we've talked about studios getting closed and layoffs. But the other thing I want to point out, and the third party in this is Silver Lake. And one of the things that I found this morning when I was doing this research is Silver Lake was responsible for selling Skype to Microsoft. And in that deal, according to what I read this morning, there was a clause in the stock grant agreement with employees that the company could reacquire those RSUs, so reserve stock units, which are essentially granted and then have to vest over a period of time, that even if those RSUs had vested, the company was able to purchase them back at the grant price, as opposed to the market price that they were currently valued at. What that means is if you're an EA employee and you have RSUs, if you have grants, if you have unvested RSUs, if you have vested RSUs that you haven't cashed in yet, anything like that, go ahead and read your agreement right now. Because if your RSUs have that same clause where the company can purchase them back at the grant price rather than the market price, go ahead and scrape as much cash as you can together and sell and turn those RSUs into shares. Because if you don't, you're not going to get the $210. You're going to get whatever the grant price is.
Okay. So this is definitely for the employees that basically that get that money from those grants, but may have some shares within the company as part of their employment deal. Now,
if you have the shares, if you've already spent the money on the RSUs and converted them into shares, you're fine. You own those shares. But if they're sitting there still as RSUs, whether they're vested or unvested, and you haven't converted them into shares yet, in other words, given the company money in order to collect those shares at the grant price, you could be vulnerable to this. So my suggestion is if you are an EA employee listening to this, please go check your agreement and understand the terms, because you could be thinking right now, I'm going to get $210 for all of these RSUs. And suddenly at the end, and especially if they were granted at, let's say, $50 or $75, you're not going to get what you think you're going to get. So don't buy that yacht yet. If you have a lot of, RSUs at EA or a car or pay off your mortgage, until that cash is in hand and until you know exactly what's going to happen. So go read your agreements, go read your RSU terms.
In layman's terms, where are those grants being utilized? Are they being utilized in the smaller studios, or is that being utilized by other labor, pretty much any parts?
It's part of a compensation package, right? It could be part of a bonus, could be part of a compensation package. So what happens is, as you might see, as part of your compensation package, you get your salary, you get your healthcare, you get all of these fringe benefits, right? And part of that could be you get a certain number of RSUs based on performance. So you are guaranteed to get some. And if you hit your bonus or hit your metrics, whatever those are, your KPIs, then we're going to grant you additional RSUs. Those take a number of years to vest. They are golden handcuffs, effectively, so that they keep good talent at the studio. So it's your RSUs are going to vest over 3 years. So that means you're going to stick around for 3 years because your grant price, and typically the way RSUs is, your grant price is going to be lower than the market price. So it's a benefit. So when you purchase them, yes, you're going to be paying taxes on the difference between the grant price and the purchase price, capital gains tax. And then, of course, when you sell them, any growth is going to be taxed as well. But the issue here is that if your grant price is lower than the market price, even when they're granted, and then you're looking at this $210 premium, which is 25% premium over the last unaffected date, which was Thursday, not Friday, because the news broke on Friday through the Wall Street Journal. So, you just need to understand what the terms of your RSUs are. You've got some time to move here if you can, but that does mean you have to have the cash on hand in order to turn those RSUs into shares.
Yeah, because I would say, is this one of they have to do it today because this is the price, or is it this is going to be that price until the deal closes through, or okay.
Yeah. Now some of those RSUs are granted immediately,
sure,
right, and they turn into shares, but some of them are essentially options. So essentially, we're talking about options here. So if you have those options and they're kind of sitting there at the grant price or whatever, they can purchase them back. Just again, there's a lot of different ways that stocks get that equity gets parsed out amongst employees as bonuses, as part of compensation packages. It's really important that you understand what type of holdings you have in the company, what the terms are around those shares or those options or those RSUs, anything like that, and understand what you need to do in order to protect yourself if there's anything you can do.
Gotcha. Okay, so we talked about kind of the macro of everything. We talked about the player impact and also even potentially even the studio's impact with potential. We talked about layoffs and that, and we talked a little bit about labor. But I kind of want to even go into just one last little bit about talking about the people currently working at EA, because we do have developers who from all different studios, including EA, who watch the show. And what does this mean for? Excuse me, sorry. Oh, something's got stuck in there in the throat. But so, what does this mean for people at EA right now? Is this what does this do for? I mean, morale. Obviously, like anytime anything gets like corporate buyout or whatever, there's always a bit of like flux and kind of unknown sort of stuff that's happening. But is this going to be like potentially good for the employees of EA, or are we talking like? This is the way, like, how the industry has been. Or we're going to be seeing more layoffs from EA over the next year or so, or even couple of years from now.
I think it's a great question. I think that it's going to be a mixed bag, and I think part of it's going to depend on personal situation. If you have a lot of shares in EA, if you've been there a long time, you have a lot of shares. They're your shares. It's not just kind of RSUs that are out there, or options. They're actual shares that you own. And you have a bunch of holdings in the company, you're watching that stock price go up and saying, look, even if I get laid off, I'm probably going to be okay for a little bit, even if I can't find a job because the market stinks right now in our industry. But if you are an average employee, if you just started there a few months ago, for instance, and you are effectively just there working, getting a paycheck, living your life, there's a lot of uncertainty. And I do not envy anybody at EA today getting this news and wondering, what is my future in the company? Because we're not going to know for a while. As I said, it could range all the way from the investors, the new owners saying, keep doing what you're doing, little tweaks here and there, but you do have to service that debt. So you've got to figure out how you're going to have the cash available to pay off the loan payments effectively on a regular basis. All the way to, we want you lean. And now, if you look at what EA has been doing, we've been talking about EA setting itself up for a sale for a decade at this point. I was
about to say, I remember hearing rumors about like NBC was gonna buy them at one point. Like they've been looking to be able to sell for a while.
Yep. And when you talk about layoffs, when you talk about stock buybacks, which we haven't touched on yet, and we haven't talked about why I hate the idea of stock buybacks and why they were illegal before the Reagan administration and should still be illegal. If you look at all the decisions that are being made, when you look at closing studios like Cliffhanger and canceling a Black Panther game, when you look at what happened with the rumored Mandalorian game that got canceled, again, we're talking about big licenses and a relationship that EA has had with Disney for a very long time, and you're just canceling games and closing studios. That is screaming, run as lean as possible so that we are prettied up for a sale.
Okay, so we potentially might see even more of that, just to kind of remove some of the debt, on some of the projects we maybe not have heard about in a while, or maybe even we'll find out at some point. Like there was a couple games that got canceled that they're working on we did not know about. Could we see something that's maybe as big as like a Star Wars game being canceled, or
maybe? I mean, I think the reality is that EA said that they want to move away from licensed games to begin with.
Sure.
When they canceled the rumored Mandalorian game, and then reiterated again when they canceled Black Panther and closed Cliffhanger, they have been talking about getting away from licensed games. Now, my other question here is, does this count as a material change in ownership such that it might impact their licensing agreements? So there are some licensing agreements that say, well, you're not allowed to transfer this license. And if there is any significant change in ownership, those licenses need to be reevaluated and need to be reissued. Now, EA is still going to be EA. It's still going to be the corporate entity that it was. I think, again, we don't really know what the structure of this is going to be. So that may trigger a license review, or it may not, depending on how those licensing agreements are worded.
So right now, Iron Man could still be up in the air too.
It absolutely could be. Now, again, the question is, EA, if it does come up for review, what's Disney going to do? Because you have a situation where if they have the option to walk away, do they do that simply because EA has already canceled 2 games and it's tying up the IP? And they might want to find another home for that IP. Or it doesn't matter because it's still EA and that clause isn't triggered by this deal.
Gotcha. Okay. All right. Well, Mike,
if that clause even exists in the agreement, just
right. Exactly. Yeah. So, well, Mike, like, I guess basically, like, before I let you go, like, any last words? What do you think, like, of this as overall? Is this going to be good for the industry moving forward? Is it going to be bad for the industry moving forward, or is it too early to tell?
My general feeling about things like this is anytime we get less information about what is happening with the largest players in the industry, it's not great. And when you have a company of this scale with a $55 billion deal, which in 2025 is an even bigger number than, I mean, our eyes fell out when the Activision deal was $69 billion. This is $55 billion in a bad market. Yeah. That was $69 billion that was triggered in a good market for the industry. So this is a huge deal. And we're talking about, I think, still the largest leveraged buyout in history. $20 billion of debt being saddled onto EA that they now have to service. I'm concerned. I don't think this is a good deal. I mean, I don't think this is great for the industry. I think it's wonderful for shareholders that are going to have a windfall, but that's kind of the problem about this industry right now, is the most important thing is returning value to shareholders and not considering the broader stakeholders. Players are a stakeholder group. Labor is a stakeholder group. All of these stakeholder groups are being pushed to the side for shareholder value. So ultimately, this is all resting on the new owner's shoulders, what this actually means for the industry, for labor, and for players.
Wow. Well, it definitely is a lot to think about on a Monday morning, but we'll definitely keep an eye on this as it develops. But Mike, thank you so much for joining me and explaining all of this, even without the coffee kicking in. We appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, if people want to be able to find you, where can everyone find you online?
Oh, great. I'm on Blue Sky, footerish.fsquared.biz. I have a podcast with my partner Amanda Farrow called Virtual Economy. We're closing in on episode 200.
Hell yeah.
We will certainly be talking about this on the next episode that we're recording this week. And I guess those are the 2 big places to find me these days.
Okay, perfect. Well, if anyone who's watching, if you have any questions or comments, please let me know in the comment section down below. Otherwise, make sure you like and subscribe. And thank you so much for being here. And thank you, Mike, and once again. And
thanks, Steve.
Yeah, see you all later.
See ya.